There is no other way to put this. I'm confused, and I swear it's because you and I are living in an alternate universe. Just look at the proof. Range Rover makes an on-road convertible, Jaguar now makes an SUV, and just what, last week Ford announced they're getting out of the car business altogether. 6 months ago, you and I are witness to Kia trying to out-German the Germans. Now, in fairness, Kia's got their own Germans. They got a German to design this thing, they got a German to engineer everything underneath, and when we drove it, at least the really fancy one with all the power, it exceeded our expectations. Could have used the stiffer suspension, but hey man, it was really good. But here's the thing, when I drove it, I was like, there was no way anybody's gonna buy a $52,000 car with that on it, even one that looks this cool. Apparently I was wrong because I have some news to report from the front. The mix, the product mix, people aren't buying the cheap one like this. Everyone's buying the fancy one, the $52,000 car. So much so that Kia has added more exterior colors, more interior colors, even like a special edition or 3. So I'm even more confused. But to celebrate that I am wrong here, at least in my projections, we're going to drive another one, but this time we're going to drive the not so fancy one to see if I can be wrong again. So I feel it prudent to kick things off here by addressing the elephant in the room, or really the exact opposite, and that is the smaller engine. 2-liter, 4-cylinder, direct-injected gasoline turbocharged engine. 255 horsepower comes in at 6,200 RPM. That's a bit of an ouch there. And then 260 pounds of torque comes in at 1,400 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 4,000 RPM. Now there's a couple of things that are important here. Number one, anything you want as long as it's an 8-speed automatic. Number two, 10-to-1 compression ratio. And number three, the engine is going in the proper direction. So it can be fitted as rear-wheel drive, which this is, or all-wheel drive, even with the 4-cylinder. Now, the biggest difference, full disclosure here, between this and the car we drove, 6 months ago, this, the base Stinger, it's this engine as opposed to the 365 horse car that we drove in the GT. But there is one other really important piece of information that impacts the way this thing drives no matter where the power goes to. And that would be the weight. If you remember back to our tech review where we covered both this car as well as the GT V6, the weight of the GT V6 in two-wheel drive form was just a shade over 3,800 pounds, and the all-wheel drive was just a shade over 4,000 pounds. Well, by saddling this with the smaller engine, it takes off 218 pounds in a two-wheel drive and 231 pounds in an all-wheel drive. So that's quite a bit of an advantage. Not, maybe, 7.5%, 8% there. So let's try it in the worst scenario, which is going uphill, put our foot into it. 255 horsepower, 260 pounds of torque. It takes longer to spool up than that V6, absolutely longer. And actually, this is a really fun turn in this car. Just a side note before we go further about this specific engine, that 3.3 twin-turbo V6, which is in many Hyundai, Kia, Genesis cars, I would argue by far it's the best engine in the entire group. So that car is, I'm a little bit biased towards it, but this engine, man, in this car, God, it works way better than expected. And I rolled into this not wanting to like this derivation of the car. Like, I remember I didn't even take a round-the-block drive in this thing when we drove the V6 because I just didn't want to waste the time. But wow, I mean, we're going straight up here. And the 260 pounds of torque, it does exactly as advertised. It's available way down low and is available way up high, which frankly is exactly what you want. And I would argue that this isn't, it feels like a V6. If I were to put like the normal car buyer behind the wheel of this thing, they would swear to God this thing is a V6, not even have a turbo. I know, you can see that knob down there, which means there are indeed adjustments even in the 4-cylinder, but it only works on the throttle mapping, the steering, and that is it. So that means no adjustable dampers. We'll get to driving dynamics later. So with that, let's go to the sport mode. Put our foot into it some more, and hopefully the throttle mapping changes. And yeah, it holds the gears a bit longer, it makes it a bit more fun, a bit more lively, but I would argue the basics, man, this is way better than I expected it to be. Like, I'm kind of shocked how good this thing is. Why, of course, I would absolutely love to have the smaller engine, less powerful car, said absolutely no one, which is why you and I need to have a come to Jesus discussion right now. The main reason why someone would buy this is because of money. Yeah, you could say fuel efficiency or taxes, but that's still saying money because there aren't any tree huggers that are going to buy this. Now, that being said, the car you are looking at is a base price of $31,900. Kind of a bargain when you think that that Avalon we just drove, that was 35 grand to start. Now, this one has a $2,000 option, and I call it like the nanny and doodad package. It's like blind spot and lane keep assist, all the stuff I don't care about. But you know me, I love me a sunroof. Well, to get the sunroof, I had an interesting live stream the other day, and this falls under the heading of both information as well as why you need to be following me on Instagram. You see, a couple of nights ago in this very spot, I ran an Instagram live stream, and it was just after getting out of that plane, doing flyovers here at Torrance Airport, and there was a big weekend, man. There was a B-17 bomber, a B-24 bomber, and a B-25 bomber. I showed you on that live stream the B-17 landing. If that were not enough, there was a 2.5-year-old kid that drove not one but two classic Porsches right up and down the row here, totally not making this up. And then if that were not enough, the product manager of this very car here, Eddie, joined us and answered your questions directly. So you do need to follow me on Instagram. Anyway, I asked him the question about the sunroof. You can't get it as a standalone option. It's in a package to make this the premium, which brings it to $37,100. Still a bit of a bargain when you think that Avalon, the fancy one we drove, was 45 grand. Now here's the thing. This one is, let's call it 32. The one I would buy is 37.1. But what about the most basic GT without the sunroof with 365 horsepower? That's 38,250. So you could imagine what the question at the end of this episode is going to be. Okay, so in that first driving segment, we handicapped this thing by taking a 3,700 and change pound car and made it go uphill with the smaller engine. Now for driving dynamics, let's do the exact opposite. Handicap it going downhill, where we're definitely going to screw with the plane of motion. No adjustable suspension. There's a little bit more, you can actually see it. You can see like the pitch, squat, dive, and roll. It's not terrible. There's definitely some control to it. It's not a mess all over the road. But I will say it underscores what we learned in the V6, and that I think there needs to be a stiffer suspension in this thing. Granted, I'm broken. Actually, felt it right there. It was a bit more travel in the suspension than I would expect. But at the end of the day, they're not selling this car to me, and that's where I find it very interesting, and that they found this unique balance. I would argue there is an opportunity for a version of this that is a stiffer suspension, even if it's not adjustable. Like, they offer a premium model which gives you like fancy speakers, a sunroof, and makes it a little bit nicer of a car. Maybe like in the old Volkswagen idea, how about an R-Line version, where maybe we don't call it an R-Line because you don't want to rip off as much as they already have from the Germans, but the idea is make one that has stiffer dampers from the get-go, not adding more cost, just, tune them a bit different. I think there is blue sky for that in this car, because the basic setup, the actual concept of the multi-link in the back, really makes this thing a wonderful car to drive. And look at what I'm doing here. I'm pushing this thing far more than anybody would buy this thing would. And you can still take it out. Like, let's say for the sake of discussion, you want to take the wife out for an afternoon away from the Rugrats. You'd have a lot more fun in this than a Chevy Impala, a Toyota Avalon, or a Camry. And that's really the underlying takeaway for driving dynamics, is the basics are exactly the same as the V6. It's just not as sharp. Now, if you really think about it, when Peter and his team set out to design this thing, they kind of made life more difficult on themselves when they said they absolutely, positively had to have a 5-door. Now, I get the whole practicality thing, but when it comes to driving dynamics, when you put extra weight in a car, especially in the wrong place, even with the guy from BMW, that makes life a bit more difficult. And as we found out in the V6 episode, it's a little bit soft on the arse end. If you ask me, probably needs a little bit more stiffening. However, it works. Now back to the practicality. Let's say, for the sake of discussion, you're the kind of guy that has, I don't know, maybe a warbird sitting around, and you need to transport something to make your warbird look effective. Perhaps you could use 23.3 cubic feet. Actually, you'd probably need more. You'd need 40.9 cubic feet in order to bring home authenticity to your 1960 model year, 380 horsepower, 2,000-pound flying piece of history. And no, they're not exactly what you think they are, but they look damn close, don't they? Okay, so if we're really going to understand the concept of living with this thing, let's take it to a place where people are actually going to use it, and that's around town in some traffic. Granted, this is a prettier version of around town with the Pacific Ocean right over there. Welcome to Santa Monica. Let's talk about a couple of notes, some just basic stuff first. Apple CarPlay, which makes this whole thing a little bit more usable. I would argue the integration of Apple CarPlay in Hyundais and Kias works a bit better than some other cars. Like, I would put Hyundai, Kia, their integration a bit higher than Mercedes. Then there's the color. Like this, I love the exterior color of this car. It is absolutely stunning to look at. It's like a rich blue. It is on offer in the GT V6, but there's one catch. You're looking at the only choice of interior color with this stunning blue. And it's blah because the interior is so cool in this thing. And you want the interior details to be shown, like the pageantry of these vents. Granted, this I don't love. Give me a switch to put this away, or maybe like hide this. Even the build quality of things actually pretty good. Wouldn't it be nice at least to have like two-tone? Maybe this is black, but the seats and maybe this part here a lighter color to kind of open it up. Now, two things about that red interior. I recently found out from Eddie, who's the product manager of this thing. He was telling me it's now on offer with more exterior colors, at least of the V6 model. So somebody's listening. So I think if this is an open letter, please, how about some more options for this blue in the 4-cylinder? But then also in the V6, this blue is on offer, but that one you do get the lighter color interior option. So please, fix it. And then while we're talking about this thing driving around town, there is one very annoying thing that needs to be fixed. We're going to come to a stop sign here and come to a complete stop with a 991.1 in front of us, of course, when we're driving a 4-cylinder. And notice the engine turns off. Got an auto hold as well, so I don't have my foot on the brake. And then if I want to continue, just, go forward, as you would with any auto hold feature. However, the setup here, you've got to hit this button, this one next to the knob here for the mode switches. You got to hit it every single time you start the car. It resets every single time. Incredibly annoying. Please fix this, because I'm like one of the few people that likes both auto hold as well as the engine shutting off at a light. Because you know what? It's 5% increase in fuel economy, so why don't we take the 5% increase in fuel economy while we're at it and have the engine stop and start. I don't know why you guys don't like that, but most of you don't. Okay, as we make our way from Venice to Marina del Rey and we see a 777 from Alitalia taking off from LAX, let's put aside the nitpicking notes and bring all of this together. Specifically, what we learned in pushing power and driving dynamics. Because if you couldn't tell, I'm surprised by this thing. And it's not the driving, it's actually a money discussion. Because what is this? 32 grand. We've talked about that. And I know that like Hyundai and Genesis and Kia, they love trotting out that Albert Bierman from BMW now works for the company. And it's almost like it's too much marketing. But full disclosure, man, this is the first car I'm driving that ain't like a super duper Genesis or something that like they brought over Lotus and made them tune it. This is the first like regular car I am driving from the Hyundai Kia group, where you can clearly tell someone who knows suspension tuning, chassis dynamics, steering geometry, someone who has been working on this in the right car company for many years, clearly spent some time here. It has been quite a lesson for me, two to be exact. The first, of course, was why, yes, there are a lot of people that are willing to spend $50,000 plus US on a Kia. And number two, damn the four-cylinder. I expected this to be terrible compared to the V6. That's full disclosure, man. But it's anything but terrible. It's to the point where I'd have a hard time if I were the guy rolling into a Kia store saying no to this over the V6. And it's not just because the delta of money, it's because this is actually fun to drive. It does everything you want it to do around town. And some of the places we took it, like I said about the Lexus Hybrid and the Avalon Hybrid, it's in the hunt against the V6 with all the extra power. So you think about it and you say to yourself, the lesson here is not so much this is really that good against the V6, because push comes to shove, I'm going to get the V6. It really comes down to this. Put aside my craziness about needing a sunroof. This, let's agree, is a $32,000 US car. What else can one get new for $32,000 US that is like this kind of equation? A basic Chevy Impala, a not fully kitted out Ford Fusion, or a Toyota Camry. And in fairness, man, the Camry used to be the worst appliance on the block. Now it's actually kind of a good car, but 32 grand? I'd be on this all day like a cheap suit over any of those cars. And that's really what the four-cylinder is about. It's not so much saving 20 grand over the fancy one, this is without a doubt what one would get over anything else, even living in like Rust Belt states where you needed all-wheel drive. Now granted, I'd stick with the rear-wheel drive here. That aside, let's go back to the question that I previewed earlier in this episode. What would you choose? The $37,000 car with the sunroof, the premium package with the fancy stereo, or would you pony up the extra, $1,150 and get the basic bare bones GT, but it has 365 horsepower? Let me know which one you would choose, why you would choose it, where you live, and you know what, for good measure, do you have a family? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media. MotoManTV all in word, MotoManTV all in word. And with that, I do want to say a huge thank you to Eddie for joining us on that live stream here. And yet another reason why you need to follow me on Instagram, because you never know when I'm going to fire up the old iPhone and do a live stream from here at the Torrance Country Club, whether it's about airplanes, cars, or even other people in the car world that can answer your questions. And oh, by the way, it wasn't just Eddie from Kia that was on that stream. There was Jacob from Mazda and Scott from AMG. So you never know who's going to join us. Until I see you next time, bis später.